As we go through the book of Hebrews each week, we've been learning that Jesus is superior to everything in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament way, so that the people, the Jewish people who were disillusioned didn't need to go back to their old ways. And the writer of Hebrews keeps giving us one new evidence after another of the superiority of Jesus. We saw he's greater than Moses, greater than the Sabbath, greater than the covenant. And here in chapter 9, we see that Jesus is greater than the Old Testament tabernacle. He represents a superior tabernacle. And what that means is that the salvation Jesus provides is completely effective. We don't need anything else to be right with God besides what Jesus provides. Now, there's three elements of that completely effective salvation that we see in Hebrews 9. The first one is that it happened in a greater tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle was the precursor to the temple. It's where the priests went to make the sacrifices to God. It contained the altar, and the incense was offered there, all of the sacrifices. Hebrews chapter 9 in verse 11 says, "But when Christ came as high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands, that is to say, is not a part of this creation." And so the tabernacle where Jesus accomplished his sacrifice was not an earthly tabernacle. It wasn't made with human hands. And so that heavenly tabernacle makes his sacrifice even more effective, and the salvation he accomplished even greater than that old covenant salvation. The next thing we see is that the salvation Jesus provides is effective because he offered a greater sacrifice than the old covenant. That's the theme really of chapters 8 through 10. But in 9 verse 12 it says, "He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption." See, Jesus didn't have to have sacrifice made for himself. He made the sacrifice himself, and so that's why it's so much more effective. And then the third thing we see is that his sacrifice then, as a result, has a greater effect. In verse 13, he reflects on how the blood of goats and bulls and all the Old Testament sacrifices had a temporary and outward effect to sanctify the people of God in that period. But if that's the case, then how much more will the blood of Christ, who offers himself as an unblemished sacrifice to God, how much will that cleanse our conscience from acts that lead to death so that we may serve the living God? And so he says that then that's a greater sacrifice. And if we really understand that, what Jesus has done for us and who he really is, he says that leads us to serve God instead of sin. We saw then that the idea of cleansing our consciences from acts that lead to death, from sin. We don't serve sin anymore. We serve the living God now because of this sacrifice, this salvation that we've received. And so think about this. Talk about it with someone or think about it in your own heart. What does it mean to have that clean conscience? Is your conscience clean before God? How can you be sure that you have a clean conscience before God, that you've availed yourself of the sacrifice that Jesus made? Think about how wonderful his sacrifice is and the effect that it has on your life, on your sin. Have a wonderful day today as you reflect on the greatness of our Savior, Jesus Christ.